Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times bestselling author and speaks widely about men, leadership, faith, the lessons of history, and the forces that shape modern culture, and is also a much in-demand leadership and communications coach. Stephen is also a faith commentator on CNN, Fox, and the Huffington Post. Some of his groundbreaking books include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search of God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, The Miracle of the Kurds, and his latest book asks the question why we must demand religious clarity from our presidential candidates. We have been, I've been talking with Stephen for about a year and something now. He got off the plane. I picked him up, and he's like, "How long have we been planning?" It's like 24 years or something like that. It's been forever. So I can't tell you how much I'm just jazzed to hear what he has to say, and I'm stoked. So guys, kick back and please give Stephen Mansfield a lacrosse welcome. Stephen Mansfield.
You don't have to kneel, really. It's okay. Because of the knees out here, I don't know what's up. When I go to heaven, I want Tony Zach to introduce me to God. Because I'll surely get in, though he might go to hell for lying. I don't know, it's an exaggeration of that. It's good to see you guys this morning, this afternoon. I've got to tell you, I feel at home. I talk really fast. My southern cousins say that when I talk fast like a Yankee on drugs. And I think Tony talks faster. Most of you talk faster than I do. So it's good to be in Yankee land. I don't mind telling you. It's wonderful. I want to talk to you today about leading in time of crisis. All of you, I know the emphasis here is on men, but all of you are leaders of some kind. You lead families, you lead your tribe, you lead your band of brothers, you lead your kids, you lead your companies, you lead on the crews of your companies. And I want to talk to you about leading in time of crisis. And the best way I know to do that is to talk about Winston Churchill. So I'm going to dive right in. Maybe we'll have time for some questions just right at the end. But Winston Churchill, greatest leader of the last century, led in times of crisis. And I think we can use his example and also maybe his emphasis on spirituality, Christianity, when it comes to leading in a way that I think will challenge you. Just consider for a moment the things that Winston Churchill had to deal with in his life. He dealt with World War I, the Soviet Union. You can read these things as well as I can. The Boer War. Crisis constantly, the Battle of Britain, which was the Nazi bombing of England, crisis of India, all kinds of things, World War II. He dealt with more crises in his political career than most people ever will who are in leadership. And yet, he comes out rated as the greatest leader of the last century. No question about it. Every poll has him at number one. And I think that one of the reasons is depicted in this picture right here. I love this picture of Winston Churchill. You can see the uncertainty in the mayor of London. That's the guy to the far left. His assistants in the middle. They look terrified. They're all looking at a bombing site, a place where the Nazis have bombed. You can see that military official right next to him. He's not terrified, but he's looking to Churchill for leadership. And what do you see in Churchill's face? You see resolution, man. You see anger. What you see, we're going to get these guys. We're going to deal with this. And that resolution, that ferocity, is what I think made Churchill able to respond into the crises of his age. But at the same time, Churchill's style of leadership was different than what most people think. It wasn't what we tend to think of today. And part of the reason was that while we have many different theories of leadership, and those of you who have studied leadership in schools and read books, you've seen these different theories of leadership, and you probably recognize this language. These are the 8 top schools of leadership. Okay? But at the same time, Churchill, while he, I'm sure, embodied at some point all of these 8, like most of us do, I don't think any one of these is always correct in every situation, still, Churchill had a view of great events, of crises, of challenge that fits the worldview of many of us in this room. I want to read this quote from him. This is not the kind of thing most historians talk about when they talk about Churchill. It's not the kind of thing most leaders bring up when they refer to Churchill. But I know you can read, but I'm going to read it anyway just to make sure we have it on audio for those of you recording. The destiny of mankind is not decided by material computation. In other words, not just natural things that are going to make the difference. But when great causes are on the move, we learn that we are spirits, that there's a supernatural aspect to the whole thing, and that something is going on beyond space and time. Now that's what makes the difference. Churchill understood spiritual dynamics when it came to leadership. He didn't just see his leadership something that happened between human beings. He understood the supernatural dynamics, and since he was leading at a great time of crisis, that made a massive difference. But then, being Churchill, he had to put it in semi-humorous terms. And so the most famous phrase that comes from him about this, he says, we want a lot of engineers in the world, but we do not want a world of engineers. All right? Sorry, you engineers, just had to go there. But Churchill reacted to some of what we see even today in our politics, which is that the procedure, that the natural stuff, that the processes are all the focus. What we're hungering for, what we yearn for, whether you're talking about churches, you're talking about families, you're talking about companies, people are hungering for leadership that is connected to spiritualities, that's connected to God, that understands people are spirits, they're not just biochemical units, and that they need to be led in those terms. And that's what Churchill did. People don't often talk about that. They talk about his speeches or his cigars or his hat or his humorous talks. And but what he recognized was that the world is not run just by natural forces. It's run, there are spiritual factors at play, and there are spiritual factors at play in leadership. Sometimes even those of us who are, people of faith, go to church, I go to church every Sunday, but a lot of people leave their faith and their supernatural worldview in church on Sunday morning, and they go do what they do all week and don't integrate the two. Churchill integrated the two, and it made a massive difference. Now, I want to express this in a different way. Churchill was a very sensitive soul, and he made friends with the animals on his estate of Chartwell, and his favorite animal was this goose. And I know it's a little silly to bring up right now, but he loved this goose. And I think that part of Churchill's greatness was that he could feel tenderness and sympathy. So I want to talk about the two geese in Churchill's life just in 20 seconds. I love this picture because Churchill loved geese and pigs. And he didn't really care for cats that much. Like me, he thought that cats were evidence that demons can indwell animals. And he had a few dogs, but don't tell your wives that I just said that. And but he loved geese. And one of the funnier episodes in his life was that the cook at Chartwell messed up and killed Churchill's favorite goose, which is this one right here. And Churchill found out about it just as they were sitting down to dinner. And in typical British style, he was supposed to carve it. But in tears, he turned to his wife, Clementine, and said, "You carve him, Clemmy. He was a friend of mine." Now, on the one hand, sweet story, emotional, and so on. On the other hand, this is a symbol that some of you, maybe who come from more liturgical churches, might know, because this is actually a stained glass window in the Celtic world, England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, etc., Australia also, some other places. And it's a symbol that the Celts, the ancient Christian Celts, used to speak of the Holy Spirit as the wild goose. They would refer to him as the wild goose because he does what he wants to do. And Churchill kept this symbol in his office. So I think he was great in part because he was a man who could feel tenderly and feel deeply. If I need to move somewhere to avoid feedback, let me know. I'm moving around you like you're the problem. I don't know what's going on. But the other thing is that he recognized he was a Christian. I mean, I'm not saying that you'd necessarily want to model your prayer life after him. But he was a Christian, and he did believe in the dynamics of the Holy Spirit. And so the two geese that he loved, his capacity to feel and be human and be emotional and be real, symbolized by his love of the goose he eventually ate, unfortunately. And then this other goose, the wild goose of the Holy Spirit in the Celtic world, very much what Churchill lived to in terms of. Keep in mind how much change he had to deal with. And I'll get to his principles of leadership in crisis in a minute. But Churchill was born in 1874. That year, electric streetcar was the big deal. Piano with pedals, was the big innovation. There are actually headlines about that. And electric cooking utensils. The year before, barbed wire. A few years later, Edison's telephone. I mean, you get a feel for when he was when he was born. He died in 1965. Now just think about that for a moment, how long he lived. The Beatles got the Order of the British Empire that year, which was an award that Churchill had gotten from the Queen for serving in the military. The first sex change operation happened that year. Man went into space, of course, and he landed a probe on Mars, and a car went faster than 600 miles an hour. Think of the change that Churchill had to manage in his life. And change was a huge theme for him. In fact, you may not know that Churchill actually helped invent all of the things you're about to see on the screen. The tank was his idea. He was the idea who suggested putting machine guns in airplanes. He suggested radar. He suggested chaff, if you know what that is. It's something used to fake out radar. He suggested a G, which was a way to steer planes. He's the one who suggested undersea pipelines. And so he was a man who learned how to master change. He was a man who learned how to flow with it. And this poster was all over England during World War II. It's on my wall in my office, reproduced by the Imperial War Museum, if you want to look that up online and get one yourself. But this was his philosophy. Live and lead in such a way as to deserve victory. Victory comes from the hand of God, but live and lead in such a way as to deserve victory. And this was the slogan that best captures his understanding of leadership. Now, very briefly, I mean very briefly, I want to give you a quick flyover of Churchill's life. Again, born in 1874, he was born to an American mother and a British father. Jenny Jerome was very famous daughter of a very famous family in New York, married Lord Randolph, who, by the way, was declining mentally all of Churchill's life, Winston's life, and hated his sons. One of the things that marked Winston's life. Jenny was beautiful, had many affairs, very inattentive to her son, and so it was actually Churchill's nanny as a little boy, a little British boy, who taught him the gospel, taught him Christian songs, taught him scriptures that came back to him later in his life. His father didn't think he was very bright. Churchill was born a stutterer, was heavy in his early life, didn't do well in school, so his father sent him off to Sandhurst, which is sort of the British West Point, except at that time it was 2 years only, and was considered to be a shorter course for soldiers, not really like our West Point. Churchill did well, started to find himself, started to excel, went out to India, and India began to study and read for himself, learn a great deal, and eventually came back, and after a stint in South Africa, where he was actually captured and held as a POW, he became a British politician, failed horribly, made unbelievably stupid decisions, that threw his country into all kinds of chaos. During the 1930s, he was the most hated man in British politics because he kept on warning about the Nazis. And during that time that he was hated, he just a man of incredible energy. He worked around his home. He actually went and got a bricklayer's license in England. And one of his friends said he was the worst bricklayer in the history of the world. But still, he did what he did, kept going. And like a lot of us, some of you are like me maybe in this regard, when I'm thinking intently, I'm moving. I'm painting or cleaning or doing something. I got to do something. But what I'm really doing is thinking. And I think he was thinking through how England ought to be led. And finally, of course, as you well know, as he said, walking with destiny, he became the Prime Minister of England. And led England, and I think the Western world, through one of its greatest challenges, with this always as his philosophy and the sort of a stamp on his speeches. Now let's talk about how he led. And I urge you to consider these things, not because I'm teaching them, but because they're an example from Churchill's life, and I think many of them are principles that come directly from our Christian faith. The first thing you do, the first thing Churchill did when he was leading in time of crisis, was he would frame the crisis. Leaders tend to assume that the people, the led, those whom they are meant to impact, automatically understand what's going on, what's happening, what's taking place around us. But framing the crisis, explaining it, and explaining it, frankly, in simple and at least God-aware, supernaturally aware language. So I'm not saying exclusively spiritual or mystical language, but in at least a fashion that's aware. When World War II was dawning on the world and Nazi Germany was on the rise, many people spoke in economic terms and talked about the Treaty of Versailles and talked about German politics. Churchill just watched it real closely, and finally he said, look, here's the deal. The Christian civilization is going to have to oppose this barbarous paganism called Nazism. And then again, he referred to Nazism as a general paganism and hedonism. Did you see what he did? He took the issues of World War II, and he didn't just say, well, there are complex international economic, all that stuff that we often hear from D.C. now. I live in D.C., and I know I've probably written some of those speeches. I try not to. But what he said was, look, it's real simple. Here's what's going on. Here are the supernatural issues. Here's what's actually happening. And you can imagine that if the whole thing had remained at kind of a complex economic international treaty situation, people in England, cab drivers, the average guy would have gone, well, then I guess the army and the politicians are going to have to deal with it. But when Churchill said, look, Christian civilization is going to have to oppose this barbarous paganism called Nazism, everybody said, well, let's go. Let's whoop these guys. And so it's a way you frame the crisis that determines whether people are able to buy in, whether people are able to be involved. There's a second issue, which I think has always marked great leadership. And even think about the leaders that you've known in your life. Invoke destiny. Now, you don't want to manipulate destiny as though, I'm destined to have your dessert here, after lunch or whatever, in some kind of a manipulative way. But Churchill believed in destiny. He believed that God preordained things. He said when he became prime minister, he said, I felt as if I were walking with destiny, and that all my past life had been but preparation for this hour and for this trial. Because he believed that of himself personally, he applied it to the British people. This is going to be our finest hour. We are destined for this fight. It's like Paul saying in 1 Thessalonians 3, don't be discouraged by my trials, I'm destined for them. When you believe you're destined for the fight, destined for the battle, that you've, as it says in the book of Esther, come to the kingdom for such a time as this, then you're not surprised by hardship, or you certainly don't feel like you're alone in hardship. So the fact that Churchill believed he was destined meant that he understood that the British people, the Western world was destined, meant then that he could summon them to their best as a people who were destined and not alone in the fight. It's a huge principle, and it bled from everything that Churchill said. By the way, think about the leaders that you admire. I would imagine a lot of people in the room admire Ronald Reagan. He's one of the highest rated leaders of late. Talked about destiny and sitting on a hill and God calling of this generation. I assume you know, not that I'm the issue, but I assume you know that I did some speech writing for George W. Bush. And the finest speech he ever gave was the National Cathedral speech after 9/11. I hope you heard it. And he said, the commitment of our fathers is now the calling on our time. Because, not just because people need to feel destiny, but because George W. Bush believes it's true. Because he believes it was true that what God had called our founding fathers to do now required a new sense of calling on our time. So number 2 is invoking destiny. And even when you're dealing with people in a company, even when you're not dealing with massive world wars and great, huge issues, still, to understand that you've at least come to this stage in your life for such a time as this. There are other phases to unfold, but we're here for a purpose. That bleeds off of every page of Scripture. It's what every major leader has believed throughout history. All leaders spoke in terms of destiny, certainly American leaders, Washington, Lincoln. I don't think there was one who didn't believe that there was some element of destiny working. And it distinguishes. It's not just a way to manipulate people or stir them into a frenzy. It's actually what resonates most in the hearts of people. You're called for this. You're here for a purpose. What you're facing is ordained for you. It's going to make you better because God's got his hand on you. That's a powerful truth. And it is part of great leadership. One of the things we do not do, and do not get me started on the fact that it's not being done today in D.C. Again, I'm on the Hill, I'm up there, I'm trying to get people to talk like this and think like this and act like this. But the third thing is define victory. We often assume that people know what victory looks like. What will the company look like if it's successful? What will it look like by December 15th of this year? What does success look like for you? What is the 16-year-old supposed to accomplish by the time he's 17? What is victory? What does it look like? Okay? Is success in high school for your high school kid straight A's? Is that it? Is success in high school to have a lot of dates? I mean, have we ever defined what victory is in these situations? Well, look at what Churchill said. If we can stand up to Hitler, all Europe may be freed, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. Now, some of the politicians laughed at Churchill a little bit for saying broad, sunlit uplands. But here's what I know. I wrote a book on Churchill, and I went and with other historians have done this too, did some research on what were the words beating in the hearts of the cab driver who was now in a tank in North Africa during World War II. In other words, what were the words? And they would drive along going, broad sunlit uplands, finest hour. You know, those little pieces of, those little phrases that defined victory lived in their hearts. There's a great article in National Geographic from 1965 when Churchill died. And there's a guy who says we were penned down in North Africa, we were getting shot up, and then Churchill came over the radio. And he said what he had said before, this is going to be our finest hour. And without even waiting for a command, we all got up and charged and took the installation opposite us. A radio speech. Why? Because victory is being defined. What are we going to do? We're going to wipe out Hitler. What's it going to mean? Europe may be freed. What's that going to mean for all of us? Well, we'll live in broad sunlit uplands. Let's go. Leaders define victory. What does victory for the faith look like in this city? What does a great movement of manhood look like in this city? What is victory? What's victory for leading with power? What's victory in your family? What's victory for your kids? Have we painted victory? Do we know what victory is? And victory doesn't have to be, you know, bombs and submarines. Victory can simply be, what's our family going to look like when we heal up and get over this thing we're dealing with? Well, what's it going to look like when all of our kids have gone off to college, or all of them gone off? What are we going to, what mom and dad in their prayers, what are we thinking about 20 years from now? What are we hoping for in our family? What does victory look like? Do you even know what victory looks like in your life? What's the unfolding of destiny look like in your life? Well, Churchill had a firm grasp on that. And then he also redefined hardship. Let me help just say something that needs to be said, especially in our generation. If we don't define the meaning of hardship, then hardship itself becomes the enemy. Okay? And hardship can't be the enemy, because hardship is what we have to go through to win, to do things, to accomplish things, right? I remember I have a wonderful son who's just now, this next week, taking a job in D.C. I, of course, manipulated him into it completely. He was living in Nashville managing a restaurant. But and there was lots of free food for me. But now he's going to D.C., which is wonderful. Well, I remember him saying at a certain stage in his life, if something was horrible, he would say it was hard. If he was dating a difficult girl, she's hard. Mom's he and mom aren't doing well, she's hard. Everything was hard. And I finally had to say, son, hard is not bad. Hard is the way we improve. Hard is what we're doing while we overcome, right? If uncomfortable is evil, we'll never do anything uncomfortable, which means we'll never grow, we'll never mobilize, we'll never take the land, right? We got a society that thinks that, you know, Starbucks being crowded is the greatest hardship we'll ever, you know what I'm talking about. And that can't be true, right? That can't be true. So I'm not chastising us. I'm just saying, you know, hardship. We're destined for hardship. I mean, those of you who read your Bibles and believe the things on the pages of the Bible, you know that we're told constantly, you know, we must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom. That all who live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. So that's just built in. It's just part of it. And if you're not a Bible reader, you're not in the Christian faith, you at least know from life in general that life has its hardship. Ask your wife, what was it like giving birth to the children? It was hell! You know, they just take off and we'll let you know how hard it was. Well, did they regret it? No. But that's part of it. So we shall draw, look at Churchill's powerful words, we shall draw from the heart of suffering itself the means of inspiration and survival. Man, every cab driver, every mailman, every politician, whether you graduated from Oxford, again, I'm talking about an English context, or never got out of school, every nurse, everybody understood what these words mean. Hardship is going to make us great. Let's go. Okay? And then one of the things that Churchill did that was extremely important, and you all, again, you're forced to watch more political news than you probably want to these days, but he determined reality. The truth is incontrovertible. Panic may resent it. Ignorance may deride it. Malice may destroy it. But there it is. What we tend to want from our leaders is that they tell us the truth about where things are and then tell us how we're going to win. But you got to start with the truth. I do consulting with a lot of organizations, and the first thing we try to do is accomplish institutional reality. You know? Like a company, I'll go in, a company will say, well, yeah, we had a $1 billion company. We had $1 billion last year. So I'll say, well, show me your stats. No, your real stats. Not the ones you show the IRS, show me the real ones. And, oh man, no, they're half $500,000 company. In fact, they're not even a $500,000 company. And so whatever the truth is, tell us what it is. We'll get better. Just tell me what the reality is. Even in your own personal growth, are you real with yourself? Look in the mirror. I don't know about you guys, but when I look in the mirror, I'm doing my best Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Aren't you? Don't you? Something, right? And then I saw a picture recently where somebody took at a party, and I looked like Jabba the Hutt. You know what I mean? Somebody caught me with my neck tucked down, and set an oil in my face, my gut out, looking like Jabba the Hutt. And I thought, I need help, But find out what reality is. I love this phrase, which I'm throwing in an extra. He said, in their generation, no one in great authority had the wit, ascendancy, or detachment from public folly to declare these fundamental, brutal facts to the electorate. Tell them the truth, and then tell them how we're going to defeat the negative reality. Just be real, be honest, be straightforward. Don't you just sometimes scream at your TV. Speak the truth. Tell me what's going on, right? And I do a lot in the Middle East, as you guys know. I'm not talking about myself a lot, but I do a lot in the Middle East, and I work with the Kurds a lot. Can't tell you how many times we could have whooped ISIS. We could just do it. There are only 40,000 people, for heaven's sakes. But we haven't done it. And a lot of that is because we haven't faced the reality of who they are and what we required to win. And then dare to act. Churchill believed that things do not get better by being left alone. Unless they're adjusted, they explode with a shattering detonation. I want to say something to you. Obviously, guys like you who come to a luncheon like this, hungry to improve, hungry to get better, hungry to be great men, you don't need to be smacked. But the great weakness of men is inactivity. What's our image of a man who's not active and up and changing things? He's sitting in his greasy sweatshirt and his holey shorts on some Saturday screaming for somebody to bring him another sandwich and a beer before the second half starts. And the house is falling in, the wife is unhappy, and the daughter's going off with Spike, on the motorcycle or whatever, and the son's upstairs in front of the computer with the door closed doing something nobody knows. And whose job is it to act? Who's supposed to take responsibility? And no offense to the women in our lives, thank God for them, but men are meant to act. They're meant to take the lead. They're meant to everything. Is it my responsibility what goes on in my home? Every last thing. Now, you don't want me putting your engine, but I'll make sure it gets done. Do you follow what I'm saying? You may not want me doing surgery on my wife's ankle. She broke her foot in New York at a restaurant. Believe it or not, I tease her, how in the world could you break your foot at a restaurant? But she broke her foot at a restaurant. Well, you don't want me fixing that. You don't want me fixing I'm not a surgeon, but I'll make sure it gets done. And I'll make sure it gets done as well. You see what I mean? Act, make it happen. One of the things I love about Churchill is that he had this sticker made. You may not be able to read it because of the colors. But he had a sticker. He was one of the first guys to develop the idea of a Post-it note. Now, they didn't actually have the sticky glue like we have now. But if the prime minister gave an order and put action this day on it, anybody in the military could go insist that any other rank in the military do that, what that order was that day, or report it if it wasn't done. So a private could sit outside the office of a general and say, sir, the prime minister has required this to be done by noon. Action this day. I will stand here until you do it. And the general's looking at this private like, I'm going to bust you. But because it has action this day on it, the private's protected, and his job is to make sure that that's moving forward. Action this day. It had to be done within 24 hours. Man, that's something during war. So powerful. And then one of the things I love about Churchill, and one of the things I love about great leadership, is his use of humor. He said, in my belief, you can't deal with the most serious things unless you also understand the most amusing. Churchill knew that humor communicates more than just the laugh. And so he used humor a great deal. And I think, frankly, most of us could use more humor, not just silly, goofy stuff, but humor that communicates. For example, in the early part of the war, the United States was giving a lot of aid to Europe, to Britain, but people in Congress suspected Churchill and thought that he was hiding things from Roosevelt, that Roosevelt was susceptible, and that he actually didn't need as much aid as he was requesting. So Churchill came to the U.S. and went and stayed at the White House visit, and Churchill took a bath in the middle of every day. So one day he was emerging from his bath, this big pink bulbous body, getting out of a bath, and in rolled, Franklin Roosevelt. When I say rolled, I mean, of course, he was in a wheelchair. So his aide wheels him in, and Franklin Roosevelt, being very upper crust, New England kind of guy, rolls in and sees Churchill there, pink and all emerged from his bath and wet and wrapped in a towel. And he goes, take me out, take me out. And Churchill goes, oh no, Mr. President. And then he pulls the towel away. He says, I have nothing to hide from the president. Double meaning. Now, there are no women in the room, so I'm going to risk another one with you. It's actually my favorite. After World War II, there was a great nationalization surge in England. They were trying to take a lot of industries and nationalize them. And Churchill was furious about it. So he was in the debate in Parliament, and he got mad, got up and walked out and went down to the men's room beneath the floor of Parliament, if you've been there. And so it's the old kind of men's room with a long urinal trough in the middle. So Churchill was at one end doing his business. Well, a few moments in walked the primary proponent, the leader of the movement, nationalization. And when Churchill saw him, he moved down to the other end of the trough. And so now you got the leader of the nationalization movement at one end of the trough, and Churchill at the other with his cigar in his mouth, harumping, and growling and all that stuff he used to do. And the guy down here kind of wants to tease Winston. He says, feeling standoffish, are you, Winston? Meaning, feeling like you want to be, stand apart from me? Churchill growls, no, but whenever you see anything big, you want to nationalize it. Well, what Churchill knew is that humor is not just about the immediate laugh. It's about the truth that then gets repeated. He knew that the trough story was going to get repeated because the idiot opposition leader was going to tell everybody. The opposition leader might have been mad, or he might have thought it was funny, but he's going to repeat it. Eventually, every cabbie, every cop, they call them bobbies, everybody's going to hear the story, even the women tee-hee, because especially if it's a little off color. Well, what's it doing while it's after the laugh? Yeah, that's true. Whenever they see anything big and powerful, they want to nationalize it. Once it stops being about his penis, it becomes about national politics. Same thing with president. When Congress heard, guys were sitting up in Congress over whiskey, laughing about Churchill pulling the towel away and going, sir. Because Churchill naked is just a funny scene all by itself, right? Sir, I have nothing to hide from the President of the United States. But see, it's the meaning that gets communicated. That kind of stuff would happen. By the way, he knew the power of symbols. When air raids would happen in London, he used to go and sit on top of buildings and take his 45 and shoot at the planes. And his bodyguard said, do you know, sir, of course, he goes, that's not what's important. What's important is that the BBC is going to know that I'm shooting at the planes, and the whole nation's going to know that. And he would do it like this: "You Nazi bastard! And he would fight, and he'd say, and then he turned to the BBC and say, "Be sure and write down what I'm saying." And it would get up to the people. I mean, even though it's a little silly, kind of comforting, isn't it, to know that your prime minister's up on the roof? By the way, one time he was sitting on the roof and he sat down on a metal thing to get a better aim, and the people had to come up from the bottom and say, "Sir, you're sitting on our air shaft." It was one of the air raid shelters below, and his big butt had covered up the air supply. So humor is important because humor communicates more than you might actually believe. We've all had to work for or follow leaders or observe leaders who insisted on certain behavior from us, but didn't embody that behavior themselves. Great leaders live out the values they're asking others to live out. Churchill said it was a nation and a race dwelling all around the globe that had the lion heart. I had the luck to be called upon to give the roar. He understood that he was the symbol of the greatness of his people, and so he could call it out. Pastor calls his church to fast. He should fast more. You as a company head, ask your people to come in early. You should come in even earlier. You know what I'm saying? Embody the values. Embody the change. You want your people to be hyper-friendly and really engage with the customers and really pursue aggressively. Well, you pursue more. You want them to take care of customers. You take care of your people. Embody the values that you want them to live. Live out the change. And then finally, remember the poetry. Now, this is my phrase, not Churchill's. Expert knowledge, however indispensable, is no substitute for a generous and comprehending outlook on the human story with all its sadness and all its unquenchable hope. You've heard this phrase that people don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care. Do you care? Do you have a heart? Does it matter to you? How many times have you looked at somebody in D.C. or maybe in your own state government or leadership or what have you, and said, do these, blankety blanks care at all about a certain skin color, a certain age group, a certain people, a certain condition of the nation? You understand what I'm saying? That's the issue. Do you care? Do you remember the poetry? There's a movie that I really like. It's called Broadcast News, and in it, a producer has said to herself, if I can't get up and cry about the stories that I covered yesterday, that's the day I should leave because my heart's become hardened. And on the day that she can no longer shed a tear about the sadness that she's seen, she leaves. She only feels like she's good at her job when she can still be touched by the feeling of what people are enduring. Churchill could. He'd hold people, he'd weep, he'd put his hand on corpses. Every time the raid was over, he would go out there and he would walk around and he would hold people and hug them and just weep with them. And it's not that people only want that. Anybody can weep with you, but this happened to be the guy who was also making the difference. This was Churchill's philosophy. What is the use of living if it be not to strive for noble causes, to make this muddled world a better place to live in after we're gone? Now, I need to say that, I believe that Churchill models greatness for us because he operated within a Christian worldview. He was a man who thought in Christian terms. He understood that people are a symbol, are spirits. He understood destiny. He understood the spiritual battles of evil and good. He understood all those things, and he brought them to bear in what he did. And we are in a bit of crisis in this country, as we all know. It's why our politics are so raucous and angry, in large part because we don't have this kind of thing. But it can happen at every level. You don't have to say to yourself as you leave here, hey, I think I'll wait until I can run for president or something. No. It happens as you and your friend get in the car and drive home. How can you have this kind of impact on just a friend, or your wife, or your son, your daughter, your friends, your company, your team, you do sports, whatever it is. The point is that you will live through crises in your life. You live in a fallen world. People will die. Things will hurt. People will get ill. There will be challenges and difficulties. How will you lead, and what will you hold to? How will you impact others during that time? That's a lot of the measure of great manhood. It's certainly a lot of the measure of great commitment to God. And it's also what great husbanding is, great fathering is, great friending is, and great business. Everything I've just said applies equally to all of those different roles. You want to prosper in business? This is a lot of the beginning. You want to be a great husband? This is a lot of the beginning. Just apply it to the soul of one woman as opposed to, an entire nation. And certainly the souls of our children are desperate for this kind of thing, from the humor to the hardcore reality to the calling to destiny. May you guys be the men and the leaders that you're called to be in this great age of crisis. It's a privilege to be with you. God bless you.